Welcome to the Futurist Society podcast, where we delve into the latest advancements in technology, science, and culture. From discussions on the latest breakthroughs in AI, biotechnology, and space exploration, the Futurist Society is your window into all of the awesomeness that the future holds. Get ready to be informed and inspired as we consider the positive impact of emerging technologies on humanity. Without further ado, welcome your host, Dr. Awesome.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Futurist Society, where we are talking in the present, but talking about the future. We have a very special episode today, another one of our in-person podcasts, which I always really appreciate. Today, we have a real thought leader in the space of robotics. Daniel Theobald is the founder of Vecna Robotics and the founder and president of MassRobotics. Co-founder. I'm sorry about that. Co-founder of MassRobotics. So the whole idea is that he's doing a lot of real cool things with robotics. So Daniel, tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing right now.
Well, I guess I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to be born in a time and place where I was exposed to these revolutionary technologies at a very young age. I grew up in San Jose, California. This was before it became Silicon Valley. I remember when I first heard that term Silicon Valley, it was, not until I think I was in high school at that point. But I was just very fortunate because I went to one of the elementary schools that had a computer lab. It was probably fifth or sixth elementary school in the world that had a computer lab. We had Commodore PET and Apple I computers there. And I just was fascinated with this technology and what it could do. And, so that just started me on this path. I think the biggest sort of theme all of my fascination with technology has been, how can we use this to make life better for everyone on this planet? And, so I just had lots and lots of opportunities. I ended up at MIT and was really fascinated with the idea of robotics because I'd been, doing mechanical engineering. I've been building robots, since I was a kid, and was a little bit disappointed MIT didn't have a robotics program. So I kind of made my own. I took classes in course 6. Everything's a number there, but course 6 was electrical engineering and computer science. And then I also took classes in mechanical engineering. I ultimately got a mechanical engineering degree. And, we are just barely scratching the surface, barely scratching the surface of what technology, even the technology that exists today.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's just say for the sake of argument, technology progress stopped. Just with the technology we have today, we could do so much to revolutionize the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really exciting. It's just filled with possibilities. And I think that our only limitation really is our imaginations.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm reminded of that old quote that the future is now, but it's not available to everyone. And I feel like it hasn't really trickled down the way that I would have hoped to, certainly not at the speed that I would have hoped. I feel like robotics has been something that, I went to engineering school too, and it was something that was available in a very rudimentary version at that time, but certainly not what you would see in science fiction, which is a great inspiration for me. I'm really waiting for that day when I can have a robot butler. So how far away are we from that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting question because we all suffer from what I call the curse of ever increasing expectations. If you go back a couple hundred years, right, you basically had somebody who spent all their time washing your clothes and cooking food. Right? That was just their job. And you had to wash every piece of clothing by hand. And we have washing machines now. So you could argue we've got all kinds of great robot butlers already, but we take them for granted, right? And this is the curse of ever increasing expectations. Like, now I want somebody to actually put the clothes in the washing machine for me, take them out, put them into the dryer, and then fold them and put them in my drawers. Because now we consider that the terrible chore of doing laundry. So it will happen. The fascination with humanoid robots over the past 5 years, I'd say, is really when it's ramped up. Again, all these things are cyclical. Where we get really excited about something and a ton of work goes into it, and people get a little disappointed that it doesn't accomplish everything that they thought it could. Self-driving cars, great example of that. And then people lose interest for a while until we sort of get like a next school generation. I think these things kind of go in like 4 to 8 year cycles, as far as I can tell. And then somebody new comes along, like, wow, we could do all these amazing things with this technology. And then it sparks a whole new fascination in it. But the key thing to remember is that we need technology to make technology. And the more technology we have, the faster we make new technology. So despite your very real and valid point that, adoption isn't as quick as we might like, it is happening on an incredibly fast time scale compared to anything else. I did this TEDx talk years ago, and as part of that talk, I was talking about the power of technology, really this sort of concept. And I took the time to sort of graph out, sort of the history of technology in the human race, and just showed the amount of technology that existed. And if ever there was a hockey stick or, an exponential curve, this was it, because technology was essentially flat for millions of years, wherever you want to actually say the start of humanity was. And then you sort of have this one thing, and then that makes the next 2 things faster, and that makes the next 4 things faster, and it just goes up so quickly. And we're at this point now where with AI, we're able to process information. And I hate using the term AI, by the way, because I think it's a real misnomer. I think it confuses and alarms people unnecessarily. But we've got these processing tools now that are able to handle such large amounts of data and help us to accomplish things in a fraction of the time it used to take. I remember when I was at the AI lab at MIT, and there was always this debate, like, do we even start this algorithm now, or does it make more sense to wait 2 years when the next generation processor is out and just starting it then will like make up for all this time that we could have been putting, it's this really interesting thing. But yeah, I mean, we will have robot butlers. There will be humanoid robots walking around doing practical things. What will those things be? We'll see.
I feel like there's a real schism in people who are interested in this stuff of the adoption of humanoid robots versus other types of robots. And I know that one of the companies that you're doing right now is doing agricultural robots, which is kind of like the second camp. How do you feel about the two of them, and where do you see the role for humanoid robots versus non-humanoid robots?
So I'd say that the modern, it's not the right word, but the most recent humanoid robot fascination kind of started, or the seed of it was the DARPA Grand Challenge, or the DARPA humanoid. I can't remember what exactly it's called, because the Grand Challenge was the cars, which sort of kicked off that one.
Right.
And the time frame was actually very interestingly very similar, because there's the DARPA Grand Challenge, and then it took a few years, and then suddenly you had like 20 self-driving car companies. Many of them have come and gone. Very small number have stayed. But it's kind of the same thing with the humanoid, because there's like 4 years after that was the DARPA Grand Humanoid Challenge, or whatever it was called. And the focus there, the reason that they were doing that was because of the observation that the as-built world was built for humans. Built at this scale, was built for 2 legs, was built for 2 arms, and their ladders and their tools and all this stuff. So if we could build robots that could just operate in an as-built human world, how amazing would that be? And it's a perfectly valid thought. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. What we find as we build these systems is that the human machine is an amazing, amazing machine that we vastly underestimate. I used to tell people, until you've tried to build a robot that does something that a human can do, you probably don't have anywhere close to a full appreciation of how amazing humans are. I was explaining, doing a little analogy to somebody once about just vision is amazing. And what most people don't realize is, because our experiences, we see, and I'm air quoting the word see, we see not the world as it is. We don't. We see a model of the world that our brain creates in our head after lots and lots of processing. And I remember in one of my machine vision classes at MIT, when this started to really become clear to me and dawn on me, when Professor Acorn was talking about they were discovering that there are multiple layers of neural processing in the vision pathways before it even like gets to the main brain or something like that. And we've got edge detection and blob detection and different convolutions, they're called, all these different processing steps that happen. And your brain essentially then takes all of these different inputs, right? It takes the same set of pixels, let's say, that are just colors, right? This dot has this color, the dot next to it has that color, that dot next to it has that color. And our brain then processes it in all these different ways and then uses it to build a very rich 3D model of the world. And oftentimes that 3D model that our brain builds is wrong because sometimes you can misinterpret the visual data. Anyway, long story short, we see a robot that has a camera on it and we think it's seeing. It's not seeing. Nowhere even close, not even remotely close. So we were working on this humanoid robot project with the US military. It was called the Bear robot. It was an experimental robot meant to help rescue a soldier who had been injured on the battlefield and it was too dangerous for another soldier to go up there. Anyway, I'm meeting with the government representative that had, sponsored this project. And he says, well, and also I'd really like it if you could just have the robot pick up, be able to pick up that cup of coffee. And I said, well, that's actually a very challenging research project. And keep in mind, this is like 20 years ago. It's actually a really challenging research project. It's out of scope of this. He says, why? He says, it's got a camera so it can see. Just tell it to pick up the cup of coffee.
Right.
And that's understandable that he would say that.
Yeah.
Right. It's understandable, but
it belies a lack of understanding of the complexity of vision.
Complexity of vision.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I have had a number of times in my life where I experience a visual ambiguity where your brain can just interpret the scene in different ways. There was one time I was sitting at a bus stop waiting for a bus to come, and there are all kinds of details that I won't bore you with all of them, but the road had just been paved, so there are no lines on it. There's sort of just all this sort of perfect visual setup for what happened. I was just sort of staring down the road thinking, and I see this truck coming, and the truck's coming and it's getting closer and closer. And then I start to get this weird feeling in my stomach. I start to get a little bit sick, and it's like my vision starts going up, and then boom, suddenly my brain's interpretation of the scene changes from a small truck close to me. No, the other way, from a big truck far away to a small truck close to me, because it was this truck that looked like a bigger truck, but it was a smaller truck, just the way it was designed. And because there's no visual reference frame, my brain, everybody thinks we have stereo vision, and so we can tell depth and distance.
Yeah.
And all that. We can't. I mean, stereo vision for my two eyes maybe gives me some extra information, sort of close in when I'm doing fine manipulation. But for the most part, our vision is monocular. It's almost more for redundancy than anything. And so the way our brain interprets information to create this 3D model is with cues. Cues and hints. It says, well, I know that a person is roughly this tall. And so if I can see a person in the scene, I can then use that to try and also scale this other thing in the scene. So it's just this incredibly complex thing.
Yeah, and that understanding varies between different people. Like, for example, the baseball pitchers and baseball batters, they have developed this understanding of space and time in such a way that it's very easy for the both of them to understand that. But you throw in something different, like a softball pitch, and then all of a sudden they're striking out.
Completely, yeah.
So their algorithm changes from one to the next, which I agree that the complexity of vision for me, I think that's the biggest obstacle to self-driving, robots. How far away are we from that being fixed?
Yeah, so I think a big part of the problem when we ask ourselves these questions is defining the finish line. I mean, self-driving works. It works in some cases, but there's a billion edge cases where it's not good enough, right? And this is where I think that my approach to robotics has been find the right applications to start with. And it's interesting because I can't tell you the number of robotics companies that all started out building a humanoid robot. We did, by we, I mean Vecna. And, I could probably name off 4 or 5 other robotics companies that you go to their headquarters and there's their first humanoid robot that's, sitting in the corner. It was a really cool project, but it's not practical because it's very expensive. It's very complicated. It's not going to be reliable. Right? For something to be reliable, for something to be cost effective, to have a return on investment, which is so important, at least in many applications. It's really about solving the problem in the most simple way possible. And so the humanoid robot research is great. It's awesome. It's amazing to move that forward. And eventually, if the interest remains long enough to continue funding this, you will start to find those applications where that technology makes sense. where there is a legitimate advantage to having that humanoid form do this particular job that no other technology is going to be able to do as effectively for the same price. It's going to take time to find that. That's what I would call sort of the technology push side of the equation, and the sort of application pull, like how do we actually have this really strong need to move pallets, let's say, for example, just to give an example close to home for me. Well, we could go out and build a humanoid robot that, is huge and it's got big arms and could go and pick up pallets and move them around. Or we could use a forklift and automate it. Right. And so there's always this play, this back and forth, but this is the fun of technology. And this is the great opportunity that we have as a prosperous society, that we've got the resources, we've got the time, we've got the interest, we've got all these pieces that can allow us to explore and play. And that's what's going to ultimately, give us the tools we need to solve some of humanity's biggest problems.
Yeah. But as someone that's in this space, like you're seeing kind of the trends happening, do you feel like more people are leaning towards that automation of existing technology like forklifts now, or are they kind of reinventing the wheel or reinventing something else that was a robot that addresses that pallet situation? Because what I see a lot more automation these days. I feel like that's kind of what I'm noticing. Is that accurate? Or
no, you're absolutely right. I mean, we are in a really big robotics wave of enthusiasm right now. It's interesting, again, talking about how these waves occur, because 15 years ago, 10 years ago, robotics was a bad word. It was a really bad word. Investors would not invest in a robotics company. So there was a mobile video conferencing company called Vigo. Tom Ryden started it. He's now the executive director of MassRobotics. Amazing guy. But he talked to me about how at the time they couldn't get anyone to really be excited about funding this idea of a telepresence robot. So they called it we'll get this a little bit wrong, but they just called it like a mobile video conferencing device. Because they didn't want to have the word robot in there, right? But now, if you don't have the word robot in your new startup, you're not as interested. It's just like back in the .com day when like, if you put .com on the end of your company name, suddenly your value was 10x. It's silly, but it's just human nature. It's just kind of the way it works. But, automation is good enough now. Science lab, government, academia. Yeah, I think we ask the hard questions. We try and do the stuff from the movies. Absolutely, it's the right thing to do. If your goal, on the other hand, is to build a profitable business, then you need to take a different approach. You need to take a more practical approach. The amount of automation that will exist in that is going to be much higher than it was a decade ago, because you can reliably do things that weren't really possible before.
How's it going in the agriculture space? Because I feel like that's something that has vastly changed over the past however many decades that we've been doing it. Now when I see agriculture, I grew up in Florida. It's very agriculturally heavy. What I noticed growing up was very much a labor intensive process where you hired cheap, skilled labor, and that was what got you to the finish line. Nowadays, it's large industrial engines that are able to do the same things. What is the difference in the agriculture space right now?
Yeah, I mean, agriculture is a really interesting environment because it's still very non-uniform. Most farms have significant differences from other farms. There's sort of like, there hasn't been a real standardization yet. And there's an important distinction, I think, with the large farming equipment versus labor. Most what we would call specialty crops are still done with manual labor. Row vegetables, strawberries, fruits, a lot of that. We're now trying to figure out how to do those things with automation. But it used to be that back in the 1920s or so, 73% of the population worked in agriculture. So it took 73% of the population to produce the food that we needed to eat to sustain a population.
Wow.
I think the latest number is like 2%. Or something like that. And a lot of that was the invention of the tractor. What that means, though, is that we figured out how to grow wheat and corn and soybeans at massive scale, and we've made them incredibly inexpensive. It turns out that wheat and corn and soybeans eaten in those quantities is not particularly healthy for us and has caused a tremendous amount of health problems. You could probably make a very strong argument to say diabetes is the direct result of figuring out how to grow thousands of acres of corn very cheaply. Full stop.
Yeah, it's actually the same with so my background is craniofacial surgery, and craniofacial growth has been affected. You know, our jaws and our face were entirely different pre-agriculture. And so nowadays, a lot of biological anthropologists will credit the industrial age as causing our jaws to shrink. It caused a whole number of different maladies, like diabetes being one of them, but
because we don't have to chew as much.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, that's really interesting in our culture, right? There are a lot of cultures that still prefer food that like has some bite to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like they want to have the bones in there. They want to work at it.
Right. And there's still non-agrarian societies that have a full complement of teeth. They have no need for braces. They have no need for, you know, any of these other, what I would call just like lifestyle diseases, you know. Anyway, point being is that I agree with you. I think that industrial agriculture has been this whole other industry that has pros and cons, pluses and minuses. But I do feel like, you know, it has been very, very technical. Like when I think of like the biggest, you know, pieces of technology, I think construction and I think industrial agriculture. Like you have like these giant things that make other things or grow other things.
Yeah. And I think it's important to keep in mind that there are pros and cons to all of these, right? So it used to be that 70% of us worked in ag. Now it's 2%. Food is cheap. And we're not eating as healthy. That's a con. Pro is we've now got, you know, an extra 71% of the population that can focus on other things.
Right.
Like creating this technology that should help us solve these very problems.
Yeah.
So at Twisted Fields, we're building an open source farming robot called Acorn.
Oh, cool.
And the whole idea there is, can we now use this much smarter, much more capable automation, right? Because the automation you see on large tractors is really decades old at the end of the day.
Right.
But this much smarter automation to try and solve some of the labor problems with actually growing good food, healthy food locally, without pesticides, without too much fertilizers that are then running off into our waterways and destroying our environment, without, you know, spraying things that are killing our honeybees. So the idea there is, can we start to use technology to empower the small local organic farmers, for example, to be able to be economically viable? And this is what it always comes down to at the end of the day. Can we grow food that is healthy, tastes good, and actually affordable for everybody?
That's awesome.
Nobody can, I shouldn't say nobody. There are a large segment of the population that can't afford to go to Whole Foods and buy their groceries there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Organic food is priced out of most people's budgets.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's a real issue that we need to figure out.
So what does the open source robot look like? Is it more of like an automated tractor type of setup, or is it more humanoid? Like,
no, in this case, it's looks more like a Mars rover.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I worked actually on the Mars rover program during my work at MIT. And this is, you know, sort of a VW bug sized Mars rover looking platform. We've done some really unique things. So our goal is not to solve every agriculture problem with it. It is to provide a platform that other people can use to solve every agriculture problem. Because as I was talking about before, farming is done differently everywhere. So our goals are to keep it incredibly low cost, repairable, easy to maintain, and then easy to build new apps for. So it's a little cliche, but, you know, we're trying to basically provide an iPhone style platform where the app builder doesn't have to worry about the navigation, the safety, the power management, the communication, you know, all of these things. They can say, all that's built already. And now I can take that and I can program it to, you know, pick up the food from the grain bin and deliver it to the chicken coop without having to like build my own, right? Because I mean, think about cell phones. If that teenager in his bedroom had to build the cell infrastructure the actual cell device, the user interfaces, the battery all that, right? It'd be impossible. But the fact that we've now created this ability of people to build on top of existing technology, it opens up all kinds of new possibilities.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're trying to do.
I just really like the idea that taking the mundane tasks and making them automated, that's something that I think is going to provide a lot of benefit for a lot of people, because right now, I mean, just the admin requirements for modern living, I feel like is getting out of control. And like, I don't think that that's something that is just isolated to me. I don't think that that's just like my gripe on modern society. I think lots of people have that feeling. There's just like so many of these little tasks. Like I have a money tree in my house, and I just even watering it every day, like maybe I might forget, like maybe like I'm going to go on vacation. Even that, I just want to be automated. And I know that there are systems out there, but I want these like general purpose robots to be able to accommodate that kind of stuff. And I like that idea of an app being able to set that up.
Yeah, we will absolutely get there. I mean, there is no fundamental reason why we won't have an assistant that's a robot that you can say, oh, and can you go buy me a money plant and then keep it alive for me? We'll get there.
Yeah, I hope so.
We'll get there for sure.
I hope so.
And my hope is actually, that's really important to me, is that as we make more time for us, that we can spend that time doing more important things. I had this really interesting experience where early in the days at Vecna Technologies, we were real early leaders in a lot of different robotics areas. And this group from Japan came over. It was, I think, a combined group from both the Japanese government and Toyota. They came over to meet with us, and they were talking about how, there was this huge problem coming because there was the graying of the workforce.
Absolutely.
Right. They were going to have far more elderly people than young people available to do the work. And so they said, so we want to build robots to take care of the elderly. And, it's partly because of the spare robot rescuing soldiers thing. And that's when it really struck me. I just thought, this doesn't really make sense. Why would we build robots to take care of people so that other people can go in a factory and assemble something? Like, let's get the robots to do the assembling so that people can take care of people, so we can be more human.
Absolutely.
Particularly like, a robot, and this we learned very quickly working on the Bear project, a robot that like is trying to interact with the human body. Boy, that's hard.
I know.
It's hard. You're talking about like getting grandpa in and out of the bathtub, or, in and out of bed, or helping him on the toilet. And like, man, that's just a recipe for a lot of lawyers making a lot of money. And then that's when I just thought, like, we should be focusing on automating the mundane so that we can be more human. We can take better care of each other. And I know that's very general and vague, but
no, I don't think so.
It's sort of been a guiding principle for a lot of what I've been focusing on.
Awesome. I'm really appreciative of that fact, because I do feel like that's something that I look forward to with a lot of the emerging technologies right now, because, things like artificial intelligence, all these other things that are coming down the pipeline, I looked at them as taking away more of the monotonous aspects. So just like even in my field, right, a lot of focus is on taking a lot of the admin work out of being a doctor, so you could focus more on the human aspect. So I can actually like talk to my patients, that I can actually interact with them, know what's going on in their lives. Because right now, so I'm just bogged down with all of the
data to the EMR.
God, it's just too much. Yeah, it's just too much, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that philosophy. I do want to talk with you a little bit about not so much human replacement or automation, but human augmentation, because when I do think that like the word robotics in my field is used as like an opportunity for really like some sort of telepresence, right? So like I'm using like a joystick that makes this other thing go, that like cuts or moves things around. And personally, I feel like that's the most exciting part of science fiction for me. When I think of like mechas and giant robots that we can step in, that makes us stronger and like more capable, that's something that really excites me.
I love that stuff.
Yeah. So like, what's going on in that space,
Yeah. Well, I think a lot is going to happen in that space over the next decade or two. I think that's sort of one of the next big frontiers. And, there have been exoskeleton projects for your Sarcos is a great example.
Yeah.
Trying to do exoskeletons forever. It sort of comes down to the same challenges I was talking about before, like interacting with the human body is very, very difficult. And we kind of think, oh yeah, I can just sort of put on this suit and it's got actuators and it's all going to work. There are so many details why it doesn't. The list is long and challenging. But again, it's about this idea of finding those right applications. And so, you've seen a lot of exoskeleton companies recently that have just focused on injury prevention rather than augmentation. But I loved your example of surgical robots because this is a great example of human augmentation where the human is the key still, right? You're not replacing the human, you're making the human better. And this idea that I could remotely operate a surgical instrument and then achieve better precision. I could achieve better safety, right? Because I can make sure that I put no-go zones, I can so that I'm not accidentally going to nick an artery or something like that. And then I can make it so that my hand motions are big and translate to smaller motions of so all these things like create empowerment and superhuman abilities that let us do more than ever before, let us be better than ever before. And for me, that's really exciting. I've always looked at it as technology should empower humans to do more, to be better. And as soon as we start talking about just replacing humans, I get less interested. And I think that it turns into more of what people see in sort of dystopian futures.
Absolutely.
Type of scenarios.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, one of the most interesting things for me, though, when it comes to just the idea of like the human interface is for it to feel natural, right? And right now there's this like focus on haptics and all this other stuff.
I actually worked in the vision and touch guided manipulation lab at MIT. So a big thing we did, and this was decades ago. But like some of the stuff that we had going on there, like still you don't find in common practice. It's just so amazing. There was a young engineer there named Thomas Massey. He was working in the same lab as I was. Our advisor was Ken Salisbury, but they were developing this very smooth cable-driven transmission robotic device. It's called the Phantom. And it was so cool. I remember when I first got to the lab, they had this little robot and you could put your finger in kind of like a thimble that was connected to the robot, and you'd close your eyes and then they'd say, feel what's on the table in front of you and tell me. And you'd sort of use your finger and you'd sort of feel around these objects. And it was very clear to me that there was, a cube there and, a triangle or whatever. And you open your eyes and there's nothing there. And the way that they were able to do that is to just have very, very smooth transmission or force feedback on the robot. So the harder I push, the harder I push back, you could have the right compliance, the right springiness to materials, even the right texture. Like as you rubbed your finger over something, you'd get sort of the vibration. So again, this is like kind of what I was saying before. These technologies all exist, and we just haven't really gotten to the point where they've been implemented into enough of the day-to-day products and technology.
Well, it's nice to hear that, because for right now, as someone who's like an end user, I don't really have that experience. Like the robotic surgery applications for me are not natural. It's like playing like the crane game at those arcades. It's just
exactly.
like, it's not really like,
they've tuned that thing to drop it.
I know, right? Yeah, no, it's
hopefully not the surgical.
Yeah, no, but like the surgical, it takes like a long time to set up.
Yeah,
it's not human augmentation right now. It's right now. It's just like this interesting novelty. I feel like it hasn't replaced the ability for a surgeon to do his job, and so I feel like that is really what I'm interested in, because I do think that technology, like you said, is all about making humans better. I think it would be great if we could be more efficient, especially with the healthcare system being what it is, like as a access to care issue. If I can do
that's
more,
a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, I know.
It's a big issue.
Yeah, no, but my point is that I do feel like technology should make things better, and just right now it's not happening. So it's nice to hear that the technology is out there. It just hasn't trickled down.
Yeah. So one of my startups is called Mechable. mechanizable, but it's sort of a nod to mecha.
Mm-hmm.
And I have always wanted to build, basically take earth moving equipment and put modern robotic technology on it.
You should.
And, these things are happening right now.
Yeah.
They will happen. Still, as I drive my tractor around today, the hydraulic controls are clunky. It's probably very similar to the surgical robots. You're at a different level, obviously, but, you're like controlling this joystick and it's moving something. And really what I should be able to do is have a much more natural interaction with those devices. So yeah, it is exciting what we can do now, and it just takes some time. The thing that I think is important for people to realize in the adoption of robotics is that robotics is a physical product, whereas software, you can, hit a button and get a download of a new version of the software. So your Facebook app or whatever, these things can just, somebody has a great idea and they can code it up. It's worldwide like that. Robots actually takes some time.
Yeah.
And
the hardware component is a lot more difficult than the software
difficult
component.
And expensive.
Yeah.
Very expensive. So it will take longer.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you will get to this point where once the hardware is capable enough, things do move at the speed of software. We were real leaders in this space because we in this case, I'm talking about Vecna Robotics, because we were sort of one of the first ones to push this idea of robots as a service. And you buy a piece of equipment, but that piece of equipment gets better and better and better the longer you own it, right? And that's not normally the way the world works, right? Normally, if you buy a car, it's good at first and then it wears out and it gets crappier. If you buy a forklift, it works really well and then performance degrades over time and then you eventually throw it away and get a new one. But it's actually quite the opposite now with our products because it's software enabled. And so you buy this product and it works really well. But next month, it works even better. It's smarter, it's faster, it's safer. And the next month after that, it's smarter, it's faster, it's safer. So it's happening. And it's really exciting to be able to also get that data. And that's really the key, right? The data coming back, right? When you sold a product and it was out the door and then you had to do a survey and ask the customers if they liked it, and most don't answer, and they weren't really getting good feedback. Now you're actually monitoring the actual performance of your product around the world in real time, many, many times. And now we've got AI and the data processing tools, the massive databases to actually make sense of all that data. So again, it's just this flywheel of innovation and an acceleration of our ability to improve and innovate that.
Yeah, no, I look forward to that day. I guess my big question before we get into the final closing remarks is, why do you feel like it's taking so long? Because I think that I've been watching the Boston Dynamics videos for probably a decade now, and I see how far they've come and it's so impressive, but it hasn't really permeated past this prototype phase.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really important for lay people to understand about videos that you see is that oftentimes, it's not always the case, but oftentimes that one clip you saw where it did the backflip just perfectly and landed might have been one of 100 videos they shot. And 99 times it didn't work. And they caught it once and it worked. And maybe it was the technology, maybe it was almost random chance. I mean, there's no doubt it's absolutely amazing technology, right? But we oftentimes see something and we think, that's solved, it works. Well, that stuff isn't solved and it doesn't work until it works reliably. And that is a long, long, long tail.
Yeah.
Self-driving cars.
Yep.
Perfect example. Right? Having a GPS guided vehicle that could stay in a lane, we had that 2 decades ago, right? That wasn't a hard problem. And that's still most of what we have. But now people are just trying to deal with all these edge cases and safety and pedestrians and roads changing. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. Weather, right? Weather is a huge one. So that's the key, understanding the difference between having a prototype work in a sort of one-off or laboratory environment versus having something that's actually a reliable product that can be deployed safely and work reliably and be done for an amount of money that actually makes sense. And for robotics, that very well may end up being decades apart. despite the acceleration in technology.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to where we started the conversation, humans are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Humans are amazing. And I would encourage everybody to, build something.
Mm-hmm.
Just try and build something,
Mm-hmm.
and just try and figure out how to build a machine to do a little task that's easy for a human.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to get an incredible respect for how amazing human beings are.
Yeah, no, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, but it's still exciting to watch. And we really appreciate you coming by here and telling us a little bit about everything that robotics has to offer for the rest of humanity. I feel like the time flew by. I did want to end with the same three questions that I ask all of my guests. The first one being, where do you draw your inspiration from? For me, it's science fiction. I look at the utopian visions of science fiction like Asimov and Star Trek and all those different, interesting science fiction books and novels and movies and TV shows. And that's something that I hope that the future looks like. And you're building something that I would say is very futuristic, which is robotics. What do you draw your inspiration from?
Yeah, I guess most of my inspiration comes from playing, I would say. So I will go out. For instance, the reason I bought this farm in California was because I didn't want to be an engineer that tried to solve a problem I didn't understand. So I actually go out and I do things conventionally. Like I went to the strawberry farms in Salinas, and I spent time picking strawberries out there with the workers in the sun. That is hard work.
Absolutely.
I go to my farm and I've got my conventional tractor and I do my conventional farming. So that for me is incredibly inspiring because I'm doing these tasks, I'm doing them for, I start to understand them at a deep level. And then that's where the inspiration comes, where I see, I can't automate this whole thing, but I can automate that piece right there. And it's going to be helpful, and it's going to save money, and it's going to save the environment. So play is incredibly valuable source of innovation and inspiration. And I would always tell my engineers, I'm like, you got to go out and you got to do that thing. You got to play with it. You got to have fun with it. You got to be excited about it. Don't jump in trying to design a tool or a machine to do it. You got to go live it first. Because the physical world, again, is complicated. I can't tell you the number of times I've like designed something and I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to work for sure. And then some weird thing happens and I realize, oh yeah, the friction here is just not, and it's all because we just create very simplified models in our brain of how the world works. And all models are wrong. So yeah.
That's interesting. I'm reminded of the Elon Musk philosophy of like treating life as a video game. That's certainly something that's very difficult for a lot of people to achieve, but I'm glad that you're able to live your life like that. For the second question that I have, I ask everybody this, and I feel like we've covered it a little bit, but what do you feel like the robotics future is going to look like in 10 years? How do you feel like that robotics are going to be ingrained in our lives in 10 years?
Yeah, I think that you're just going to see a whole lot more of them. I think we're at the point now where we've found in many cases where robots do provide value, and we're starting this adoption curve. So I think you're going to see that, there are going to be thousands and hundreds of thousands of, robotic forklifts out there, because this is a job that's ideal for a robot to do. And that's freeing people up to deal with exceptions, things that robots aren't great at. Are we going to have the robot butler yet in 10 years? Probably not.
What about Optimus? You don't think so?
Probably not in 10 years. If you've got a lot of money and you want to get an early prototype of a robot that, whatever.
Yeah.
But we have robotic vacuum cleaners.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Do you have a Roomba, by the way?
I don't right now.
Yeah, I have one. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just get rid of all my carpets because
Gotcha.
get dusty and stuff.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I don't like to try and predict the future. There's surprises all the time.
Yeah.
And somebody's going to come along, and some really smart person, they're going to find like this perfect formula of, I can have this, bipedal robot that does this great job. And the thing that's pretty amazing though, and we can thank Boston Dynamics and MIT for doing a lot of the groundwork for this, but you're seeing the price of quadruped robots and bipedal robots just plummet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And one of those robots would have cost, $1 million to build up until recently. And now you're seeing, humanoid robot companies pop up all over the place.
Yeah.
So they're going to be around. Exactly what will they be doing, or will they be mostly novelties? We'll see.
Yeah, no, I hope that that kind of technological deflation keeps happening. I was just talking with this
You
guy.
haven't bought an Atlas robot yet?
I'm saving up.
All
I'm
right.
saving up, you know. I'm definitely gonna be one of the first adopters for sure. Like if I can even just have a robot that waters my plants, washes my dishes, and folds my laundry, if it can do those three things, I'm sold. Like
Nice.
I'll pay any price for that. But yeah, anyway, I do look forward to the technology coming down, being more affordable, more accessible. So last question, you know, there's so many different technologies, there's so many interesting technologies that are happening. You know, like you were saying, we're on that hockey stick path as a species right now. What other than robotics really excites you? Because I feel like, you know, there's so many articles that I read, and I could tell you, you know, AI is
Yeah.
obviously, you know, the lowest hanging fruit right now. But what really interesting is to me is also genetics, longevity,
Mhm.
robotics obviously is something that interests me. But what about yourself and
Yeah.
being this thought leader in the robotic space? What are you most excited about?
To tell you the truth, one of the things I'm most excited about is what I would call simulation and optimization.
Hmm.
And you might not hear this very often, but I
No.
think our huge opportunity as a species is to start to optimize in ways that we haven't been able to before. We have a tremendous amount of waste right now that occurs in our economy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we get packages delivered at the farm. We'll get sometimes, 5 different delivery trucks in a day, all delivering packages down this very long road that, all wasting fuel. And oftentimes it's one little teeny package.
Mm-hmm.
There is so much waste going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the data that we've now got available, because we're starting to get to the point where we're tracking everything, and with the technology to process that data, now what we need is an environment to try it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's simulation.
Mm-hmm.
We now have the processing power to build what many people call digital twins
Mm-hmm.
of the world, of a warehouse or of a transportation system or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is. And if we can get those digital twins to high enough fidelity that we can run realistic models
Mm-hmm.
on them, then what that allows us to do is basically A/B test the future.
Mm.
A/B testing where, they'll say, let's design the web page this way, or let's design it this way. And then
Right.
let's have users try both and say, I like this one better than this one.
Yeah.
Right. But we can't A/B test the future right now, right? You can't like say, okay, well, what if I ask this question or that question?
Mm-hmm.
And then, choose the future that actually works out best. Simulation allows us to do that
Mm-hmm.
to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited about this. In robotics, what that means is when our robot is trying to accomplish something, if you have this full model of the world, it can then be kind of like a grandmaster chess player,
Mm-hmm.
right? What do those chess players do? They see the state of the board.
Mm-hmm.
They understand maybe how their competitor's thinking a little bit, but they see the state of the board, and then they sort of forward simulate, 100 different possible moves.
Mm-hmm.
And then they pick the move that gives them the best chance of success.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we can do with simulation. We're in a warehouse or factory, and I need to try and make a decision. Do I send a robot to loading dock A or loading dock B? Well, right now, those things are typically fairly hard coded based on what happened yesterday or something like that. But if I can say, okay, here's my simulated warehouse, I'm going to send one robot to A and I'm going to send one robot to B, and I'm going to see what happens. We're basically going to cheat and play time forward faster than time. We're basically going to accelerate time. Then you're not guaranteed to get the right answer, but the statistical, chance, bless you.
Thank you.
The chances of getting to a solution that is most likely to provide the outcome we want, just like in the chess game,
Mm-hmm.
is much, much, much higher.
Interesting.
So simulation allows us to optimize, which allows us to further accelerate and make better uses of our resources than ever before. We did this one. We're probably running out of time, but I'll
No,
just
it's
tell you this
okay.
one
Go
thing.
ahead.
We did this one very interesting study at one of our customers where we basically installed robots and had the robots sort of just doing what the humans did, sort of on a standard schedule,
Mm-hmm.
pre-programmed schedule of you go here, then you go here, then you go here, then you go here, and it was great. The robots showed up for work, they were reliable, all of that. But what we found is as soon as we said, okay, but now we've got robots that can respond to changes in commands in real time. He said, well, what if we now make this all much more dynamic, where the robotic system and the humans involved working together could respond in real time to what's going on upstream or downstream in the warehouse or factory. And what we found is that if we could do a better job of optimizing in real time what was going on, we were able to get twice the throughput, 2x productivity in the same space without adding any resources. And you'd think, oh, that doesn't sound realistic. But it is realistic if you realize that in any system, the throughput is always limited by one bottleneck. There's always one limiting factor. And humans are terrible at figuring out what that bottleneck is in real time and dealing with it. But with these electronic systems, with access to data, et cetera, we can now say, things are slowing down on conveyor belt C. Let's fix that immediately. Let's not wait until it brings everything to a grinding halt. And just by achieving sort of that next level of optimization, again, you get this exponential boost to productivity across the entire system. And that level of productivity boost can literally happen across our entire world economy. And as we integrate more, as we simulate more, as we take more advantage of AI processing of massive amounts of data, you're going to see massive changes in that area. The robot butlers will come and they will be great. But I think the thing that really changes the trajectory of humanity is our ability to optimize our resource utilization.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've never heard anybody talk about that before, but I could see the dividends that it would pay. Listen, this has been a really interesting conversation and I really appreciate you coming by. I'd love to have you back. If you're ever doing anything cool, we'll be happy to talk about it. For those of you guys who are listening, check out Daniel on all of his different social media. Check out what he's doing with MassRobotics, with Vecna. For us, please like and subscribe. For those of you guys who are following us on a regular basis, we will see you in the future. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
We appreciate you taking part in today's episode. Take this chance to reimagine a better future by joining a community of futurists who strive for a remarkable world. Be a part of this growing network and contribute to making the world a more positive place. Visit thefuturistsociety.net and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a drop of hopeful futurism.